Hey everybody, KC here. So a subject that has come up over the years here on Morning Newsbeat is the Food Safety Modernization Act and FSMA and what retailers needed to do to live up to its mandates. We've been talking about this so long. Well, I just want to show you a little video. Watch this.
It long has been a truism that the United States has the safest food supply on the planet. But the Food Safety Modernization Act, bipartisan legislation that had its origins in the George W. Bush administration and was signed into law by Barack Obama, was enacted largely because modern realities about sourcing and importing and other production issues meant that it just wasn't safe enough. New food safety regulations go into effect in August 2015, and it seems evident that many retailers, wholesalers, and manufacturers will not be in compliance. This creates a problem, but it also creates an opportunity.
It's pretty dramatic. It's the most dramatic change in food safety regulation in 70 years. It will touch every business in some way or other, directly or indirectly, that's in the global food supply chain.
So all I can say is that the CEO of ReposiTrak, which is a company that has handled a lot of these transparency and trackability issues, Randy Fields, he's aged a lot better than I have. But I keep hearing about how FSMA is back and there are new demands and there are fresh demands and there's new things that retailers have to do and there's something called FSMA Rule 204. And I wanted to get to the bottom of this and figure out exactly what's going on right now, get an update, and find out what retailers need to do. Retailers, manufacturers, as well as producers. So I reached out to Randy. He agreed to do a Zoom conversation. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Randy Fields, the CEO of ReposiTrak. Randy Fields, welcome back to Morning Newsbeat. We started talking, as I showed in the video, we started talking about FSMA and what retailers need to do like a decade ago. And in some ways, it seems like we finally reached the point, probably took longer than you would have expected. Maybe took as long as retailers would have hoped, but we finally got to the point where the chickens have come home to roost. So give me a quick sort of primer on where are we right now in terms of what the government wants and where retailers and suppliers are in terms of providing that information.
Well, first, that's a great observation. It's certainly taken longer than I think anyone reasonably would have expected to get FSMA to where it is. Let me give you a little background on that because it was an interesting detour. The original goal of FSMA, as we understand it, was to ultimately provide near real-time traceability around high-risk foods, so that if there were an issue, you could easily identify what the source of the issue was, and more importantly, where's the rest of that product so you can get it off the shelf. That was really, I think, the objective. And it was written into the original Food Safety Modernization Act that was signed into law in 2011. Now, frighteningly, and I do mean frighteningly, the FDA talked a lot about it. And then suddenly, around 2014, the discussion ended. So we have a law that goes into effect with supposedly a regulatory support structure. And around 2014, the FDA just seemed to stop discussing it. Not too long thereafter, the state of California and the Citizens Watch Group, that curmudgeon who doesn't like McDonald's French fries, decided to sue the FDA to cause them to actually enforce the regulation around traceability.
And we don't know why. We don't know why FDA suddenly decided to stop enforcement.
Exactly right. I've asked a number of people in and out of the FDA, and people just kind of go, didn't seem like the priority. So the consequence was, out of this lawsuit, that the FDA signed a consent decree, which is therefore legally binding, to get going on traceability. They had two date requirements. The first date requirement was about 2 years ago when they had to publish the list of, call it products that would be covered under the rule. And it's called Rule 204.
Right.
They did that. And it's, depending on how you count the categories, it's 16 or 18 categories of products. But basically, it's pretty encompassing in terms of SKUs. It's many thousands of SKUs. Then the second thing they did was to publish the rules around enforcement and what it had to look like and what you had to do. And they did that last November. And it went into effect. So it is now the law of the land, the regulation of the land, in January of this year. The FDA is allowed approximately 3 years, up from a proposed 2, so they made a concession, for enforcement to begin. So there's a breathing space by which companies can, in fact, begin to do traceability. So that's the background.
So when is the date now?
The date is, well, it's the law. It is
the law now, but when does the breathing space end?
It ends in January of 2026. So there's about, 28, 29 months left.
Which in terms of what needs to be done, that's tomorrow.
Oh, in fact, it's almost yesterday. Here's the reality. It covers every restaurant, essentially, in the United States. Call it 1 million buildings. It's every convenience store. It's every QSR. It's every food service, and it's every grocery store and every bodega. We estimate that it covers about 1.5 million locations in the US to be implemented, full on implemented, in a very short period of time.
And the categories that I largely,
the most problematic things are things like leafy vegetables, the things we all know, tomatoes, finned seafood. So there's a whole variety of fruits, vegetables, seafood, soft cheeses from the dairy industry, nut butters. You just have to imagine how many things contain peanut butter. So there's an extraordinary range of products. And prima facie, it appears to be, well, yeah, this is just something we're going to have to tackle. But I think people don't understand what the rule says. The rule says you don't have to tackle it, you have to track it. Right. So that means we've spent a decade automating and making receiving, for example, at a store level, regardless of the industry, a more automated, easier to do process. You can take all of that and throw it away. We're going back to item level receiving at the store. This is a burden that is almost unimaginable from where we are today, given how much time people have spent developing electronic invoicing systems and whatnot to speed up receiving. So it has a profound impact at the store level, a hideous impact at the distribution center level, because if you imagine, envision for a moment, you have an 80-door DC, you have 4 trucks deep at each door. They're worried about their dwell time. And here's the question as you stand on the dock looking out at this sea of trucks. Which of these trucks has Rule 204 products anywhere inside of it? Which of the trucks and which of the pallets on which of the trucks are those that you have to pay special attention to? So distribution centers are based on the concept of productivity, not selection. So now suddenly you're going to have to go back to some form of selection process where the number of items that will be special handling will fundamentally disrupt DC operations. If you were to ask me this question, which you haven't, but I'll ask it of myself. Let's see how well I can answer it.
I promise I would have. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see how well I answer it after I ask it. If you were to ask the question, are companies aware of 204 and how it impacts them? The answer is not even close. A very substantial percentage of companies have only vaguely heard of Rule 204 and frankly have done little, if anything, to prepare for it.
Now, when you say that, are you saying, or does that lack of awareness, is it both big companies, not necessarily Kroger and Albertsons, but companies on that scale, Ahold Delhaize, as well as the 2 and 3 store independents? I mean, is it up and down the scale, or are the big ones better prepared than the small ones?
Well, the bigger ones have a higher level of awareness, and everybody has the same degree of not preparedness. How's that?
Okay.
So, and the reason we say that is that the work that's gone on, and the produce associations have done tremendous work in this idea of traceability. The problem is everybody started as if the issue was primarily a producer issue.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow they would have to be able to track their products and create labels and other bizarre ideas that would enable traceability. Well, that sounds nice, but every time there's a label on something, what's the requirement? Scanning. Whoops. So in other words, what each producer did in creating some level of traceability, some level, not enough, by the way, for the most part, no one that we see actually has all the information on the label that the FDA is requiring. That's a problem. But more importantly, they're making an assumption that their job ends when they put a label on a box and they send that to their customer. Well, imagine the customer is a wholesaler, and that wholesaler has, let's say, 1,000 suppliers who are covered by Rule 204. Mm-hmm. How the hell does he read that? He can't. So in other words, people forgot that at the end of the supply chain, at the retail store and at the distribution center, that's where the problem is. So there's no standards, there's no homogeneity, which means either every retailer is going to say to his supplier, here's how I want to get this information, or people are going to be stuck. It'll be like speaking a foreign language. So suppliers are going to be inconsistent and find from their customers that their customers are going to say, sorry, dude, I can't read this stuff. You'll have to change what you're doing.
So you used the word burdensome before, but it also seems to me that it is it also has its advantages for business. For example, right, a certain kind of lettuce they find to be tainted. Now, we know that when that's happened in the past, sometimes, regardless of if the fact of that lettuce came from one particular part of California, suddenly all of that kind of lettuce is gone because they're not able to distinguish at that point.
Correct.
So this will, in fact, allow retailers to keep product. It not only will it enable them to take the product off the shelf when there's a reason to take it off the shelf, but it'll also allow them to keep product on the shelf that doesn't need to be removed. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's a theoretical assessment.
Okay, well, it's all theoretical.
Yeah, but here's the problem with that assessment.
Okay.
We're going to have to make the assumption, really what you're saying, and I agree with, this would enable the idea of rifle shooting recalls.
Right.
And we have our recall system now as part of what we're doing in this whole traceability initiative. So it certainly enables that. That's a big benefit. Another big benefit that we're finding that our customers want relates to sustainability. We're able to track the inbound sell-by dates, expiration dates, et cetera, so we can help people at the retail level identify products that are about to go out of code. That's all the goodness. The badness is we have to, and we will know where the inventory is. So if you have 2 batches of a product and you have 300 stores, we'll be able to identify the stores exactly where those batches are, so you can rifle shoot the recall and get it off the shelf. Here's what remains to be seen. Will the consumer be smart enough when he hears that romaine lettuce is an issue to know that this romaine lettuce is the one that won't kill you and this one is the one that will kill you? I don't know. I think that's a difficult proposition that has not yet been fully vetted, and won't be until we've got the experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the response to that for me has always been retailers need to do a better job of educating their customers, right? I mean, very often when romaine lettuce was recalled in the past, you'd walk into the store and the section that had romaine lettuce was just empty. And they did very little to accept. I rarely saw signs that say, "Here's why it's empty. Here's what
Correct.
we're trying to do." Right? They didn't do a good
Right.
job of educating their customers. And by the way, if you're looking to make a salad, normally you'd use romaine. Here are your other options that are really
Correct.
like they don't do that. So it will, yes, it will demand more of retailers in terms of educating their customers and saying, "Hey, this is the good stuff. We got, the bad stuff we got rid of, but this is perfectly good romaine lettuce." Yes, that requires them to do more education, but in the end, that's really good for business.
Yeah, I think it has, that's why I say it has the potential to be
Right,
very good. We just haven't seen people doing that yet, but
right,
it certainly opens the opportunity. In the meantime, what we're looking at is the ability to reduce food waste, identify products going out of code at lower cost, and frankly, better inventory management because we're tracking the movement of all those inventories. So we certainly think there's economic advantages. In fact, here's our business proposition. What we say to someone is, if traceability were easy and free, would you do it? And the answer is, hell yes, we would. Well, that's the path we're going down. We're going to make it as close to free as can be done. And our strategy and technology for execution is about as easy as it gets. It doesn't require scanning cases and all that sort of stuff. So I think we're about to find out. In other words, if it were free and if it were easy, would everybody do it? And I think the answer to that is a resounding yes, because there's economic benefits, as you're pointing out, for both the supplier, who can target recalls, who will know more about the consumption of his products, et cetera. So I think there's compelling reasons that if you do what we're doing, which is to make this just absurdly cheap, back when we tell people how we price it, they kind of go, "What? Seriously?" I've never had that low a level of resistance with retailers. But beyond that, I think it changes the landscape in some unintended ways, probably most of which are good.
So this is such an interesting conversation with Randy that I let it go on a little bit longer than I ordinarily would. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break it into two parts. So this is the end of part one. And tomorrow we'll have part two of my conversation with Randy Fields of ReposiTrak about FSMA demands on retailers, suppliers, wholesalers, and producers.